And good evening from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. Tonight coming to you on a Thursday night, another day closer to the weekend. And with me, as always, my co-host to introduce our special guest for tonight, my co-host, Chant Hanna. Good evening, Chant. How are you?
Good evening, Frank. I'm doing really well, thank you. We have a wonderful guest on with us tonight. His name is Tom Bowden. He joined MUFON in 2000 as a member, then became a field investigator. He then moved on to becoming an assistant state director in 2001. Immediately there became state director of Oregon MUFON. In the mid-70s, Tom joined APRO, also known as the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. He immediately became a field investigator in that organization and was a field investigator for APRO in the 70s, which I believe APRO to exist in about 1984. Previous knowledge about UFOs, he had previous knowledge about UFOs and had colleagues that were involved in the same topic as well. The current assistant state director of Oregon MUFON is Kelly Graham. And Oregon MUFON has field investigators who are actively working on UFO-related cases right now. Thank you, Tom Bowden, for coming on the show with us today.
Hello, thanks.
We appreciate you coming on the show. I had a wonderful opportunity to speak to you beforehand, and I really want to learn more about a really fascinating case that you'd like to bring up tonight, and that is the McMinnville case. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that topic?
I'm sorry that for some reason I didn't get what you just said.
Well, we're going to want to talk about the McMinnville case. They've got a big festival built up around it, and you have a famous case. So you tell us all about it.
Oh, absolutely. McMinnville. All right. On May 11th, 1950, a farmer named Paul Trent and his wife were living near McMinnville. They weren't actually in town. They were on a farm out beyond the town a bit. And they, the wife saw, and her name was Evelyn, she saw an object in the air. It was what we call a flying saucer. And she ran and called to her husband and said, "Paul, quick, get the camera. There's a flying saucer out here." So he came out with the camera, and they saw it. Both of them saw it, and another relative, I believe it was her uncle or something. I forget exactly what the relationship was, but another family member also saw it. Paul got two shots with an old-fashioned camera with a large format black and white film. He didn't get the film developed right away. After a few days, he took the film into town. It was developed, and the gentleman in the drugstore looked at the photo, and he said, "Wow, look at this photo that Paul got." He took he made an 8x10 print of it, and he took it and he showed it to the man in the bank, and he showed it to the newspaper editor, and they decided, "Oh, this is great," and they ran it on the front page of the newspaper. Back in those days, we didn't have the internet, but we did have wire services. This got on the wire services and went viral. Today we talk about things going viral on the internet. Back then it was just the wire service, but it was picked up by other newspapers and magazines all over the country, technically all over the world. And meanwhile, Paul and Evelyn Trent, they were just Oregon farmers. They weren't looking for publicity. They didn't know anything about all this stuff. In fact, they were not even, they didn't even give permission originally for these photos to be published. It was the man in the drugstore who developed the photos, and the newspaper publisher and the banker who put a picture in his front window who initiated the publicity. Well, it's one of the most interesting and hotly debated photos over many years of ufology. And I will tell you, it stands up to the test of time because it's been analyzed by some experts. Some of the people who claimed that it was a a fake, their story's been debunked because, first of all, Paul and Evelyn Trent were just farmers. They were not someone who was looking for publicity. They were not someone who would have faked a photo like this. Besides the fact that they had no idea how to fake a photo. Some people claim because there were telephone wires in the photo that it was a model suspended by telephone wire, by wires from the telephone wires. But
I've got that pickup right now, and it looks like it is well behind where those wires look like they go over the top of a barn, it looks like, with a tank attached to the side of it. And then the photograph of the UFO is sort of more of like a top-down angle, and it looks like it is well behind where that barn and that those wires are.
Well, that's a good point that you're making. But when it comes to analysis like this, you got to go with facts. You can't just go with someone's guess. And Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who's an expert in photo analysis and actually worked for the U.S. Navy as a photo analyst. By the way, he's one of the people on a team that discovered the Russian missiles in Cuba and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so he's really made his reputation as a photo analyst. But anyway, he did an analysis of that photo, and he said, look, the atmospheric interference causes distant objects to have a different look than things that are close. And he pointed out that the telephone poles and telephone wires were closer to the camera than the object by quite a distance. And this was just based on the amount of light fall off that occurs over distance due to atmospheric interference. And he did a mathematical analysis of that. So anyone? Pardon?
Not to interrupt, but was Dr. Maccabee able to come up with an estimate in terms of the size and the distance of the object? The distance.
I don't have that information handy, but what I was going to just say is this case alone is worth a great deal of study, and I don't have all the facts in front of me because I wasn't really prepared to talk about that particular case. But I will tell you that it's really worth looking into, and I would invite anyone who's really interested in it to look it up on the internet and try to get as much material as you can about it, and you'll find that it's a really great case.
And the photos are there, and they speak for themselves. They're easy to find, so you can look at it and judge for yourself. And this is the second one as well, and it looks like it's changed quite a bit in terms of angle too. The two photographs taken from the same angle, but the object really in quite a different position.
I want to point out that photos are important, but I always feel, and I'll say it again and again tonight, when we look at photo cases, we need to understand the people involved. Who took the photo? What was the situation? Because in a lot of ways, human perception trumps the photo. And also, you want to know something about the character of the people. Now, Paul and Evelyn Trent have passed away, but they have relatives still in McMinnville. And the people that knew them, the people that are related to them, they know that Paul and Evelyn Trent were people of the highest character. They were plain farmers. They weren't anyone that would have engaged in any kind of funny business or anything like that. Hang on, I got a phone call coming in on another line. I got to mute.
Okay, well, we've got these images up here now. Chant, you're still with us, right?
I am absolutely enthralled by this case. I'm listening.
Yeah. Let's see. Have you taken a good look at these pictures? Because they are compelling. They really are.
Yeah, I'm staring at them right now, and it looks like folks have analyzed these photos to death. And there's quite an interesting definitive biography of them, including a provenance on Wikipedia.com regarding the McMinnville UFO photographs. And just a little blurb on it. It says, the McMinnville UFO photographs were taken on a farm near McMinnville, Oregon in 1950. The photos were then reprinted in Life magazine and in newspapers across the nation and are considered to be among the most famous ever taken of a UFO. And then, of course, Tom goes on to mention how folks have suspected some kind of trickery or hoax-related type activity, but it does say that many, I think there are many serious folks with academic backgrounds who take these photos very seriously.
And looks like one of the photos that I was able to find was published in Life. Looks like they sent somebody out. Looks like Life magazine itself sent somebody out and took a picture of one of the young boys that were part of the family standing up on a step ladder there. So that is really interesting.
Yeah.
And
also, I'm glad that folks had the ability to magnify these images to the level they have. They're actually pretty clear. So if folks want to see something that has been scrutinized probably thousands of times, if not more, by people all around the world who are just stumped by these pictures, you might want to really look up these fascinating photos.
And another thing I brought up with Tom, he wasn't too terribly up on it, so he didn't want to go into it. But I'll mention it while we have a little bit of a break here. A few years later, in 1954, there was a photograph taken in Rouen, France, that seemed to show another UFO that looked really quite a bit, not pretty much a dead ringer for this particular McMinnville UFO, and that got a lot of additional attention as well. So that was a little bit of an interesting side story to this particular case. So very interesting case here. Very interesting case.
I should have chimed in and told you that I've been back for a minute or so.
Oh, okay.
I just muted because I wasn't going to pick up the call, but the phone was ringing behind me, so I just.
Yeah, so I was just talking about how it looks like Life magazine took the extra step to actually send somebody out to the Trent farm. And actually, it looks like they did a story. They took some photographs. It looks like one of the sons in the family is in one of the photographs here.
I'm not aware of that.
Are you not? Okay, okay.
Know about that.
All right.
Okay, well, I just wanted to mention a little bit about Bruce Maccabee, who actually Frank and I do know, and I've actually come to know as well. He's an icon in the realm of ufology. I don't know anybody who couldn't know him and be involved in ufology. He's an American optical physicist, and he was, as Tom was saying, formerly employed by the U.S. Navy. And he received his physics at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then he moved on to Washington, D.C. And he began his career at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in White Oak, Silver Spring, Maryland, which later became the Naval Surface Warfare Center Division. So I just wanted to share that background on him, including that he worked on optical data processing, a generation of underwater sound with lasers in various aspects of the Strategic Defense Initiative and ballistic missile defense using high-power lasers.
All right. And so, Tom, do you have anything more about the McMinnville case, or do we want to move on to some of the cases you've worked as state director for MUFON?
Yeah, I'd really like to move on because there's lots of info out there about the McMinnville case. But I've got a lot more cases. Oregon, when you look at the stats on UFO cases reported to MUFON, Oregon, if you just look at sheer numbers, Oregon doesn't rank that high. But if you compare the number of reports to the population, it turns out Oregon has a high rate of UFO reports per capita. And so we have a lot of activity here.
Now, is there any particular part of the state that seems to stand out compared to any of the others? Any hot spots?
Well, I have a little problem with that. I tried to chase down some hot spots over the years, and it's really tricky because one of the problems we have with UFO reports is we get we only get a small percentage of the reports from people who see UFOs. And because we don't know how many people see UFOs that don't report them, we can't quote you an exact number. But Stanton Friedman and I talked about this, and he agreed with me. We're pretty sure that the rate of reporting is somewhere south of 10%. And we think maybe even more like 5% of people who see UFOs report them to someone or to an organization like MUFON. One of the problems is people don't know where to report them. One of the big problems is if people try to report them to the Air Force, they get nowhere. If they report them to the local police, the police don't think it's a matter for them. It's not a crime. It's not a public safety issue that they can really say is in their jurisdiction. So unless the policemen themselves see the UFO,
Yes.
it's very unlikely that they're going to react to a report like that. So, but still, there are some areas where I've seen some, from time to time, statistical anomalies where I say, oh, wow, there's more reports from that area than you would think for the size of the town. Let me give you an example. There's a town named Sutherland down along I-5, somewhere north of Roseburg, Oregon. It seems to have a disproportionately high number of reports coming from there. It's in a big wide valley with a lot of views. It's not heavily forested right there, close to the highway. So about half of the reports, more or less, that I've gotten from that area over the years have been from people that are traveling on I-5 through there. So they're not residents of the area, but there are reports from residents in the area as well. So I guess if there were a hotspot, that might be one. But I don't have any real hard data to say, yeah, that's for sure a hotspot. And hotspots are a little tricky because you can have something going on in one area for a couple of months or even maybe a whole year, and then it fades away and it's not happening anymore. So it's really hard to pin that down.
Now you did send along you did send along a couple of drawings of sightings. Looks like the witnesses got a pretty good look at the UFOs. The one that I've got up now is the one that there's a triangle with yellowish lights at each point, and then one in the center, and you've got a directional north-west, east-south on the image. So
yes.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that case?
A little bit. I wasn't the primary investigator on this one, but I did just look at this one. Two young men were hanging out on our back deck of one guy's house. I'm not sure what they were doing, but they were doing whatever they were doing, and they were looking at the sky, and one of them saw this object go over. And he tried to tell the other guy, but he was somewhat obscured by the trees, so he didn't see it as well. But the primary witness who filed the report said he saw this object go over with 3 lights on the bottom. Actually, there may have been a central light. I have to look at the picture, but I see so many, I get them mixed up. But
yeah, there's a central light in this one.
Just went over. He said, I said it took about 15 seconds to go across the sky. And that was in Hillsboro, Oregon, which is a suburb west of Portland. In the same area, a few years, and that was in September, on September 11th, 2013, that occurred. So I have another report from that same area, Hillsboro, October 16th, 2011, at the early morning hours, 6:10 a.m., a woman had picked her daughter up from the Hillsboro airport, and they were driving on heading out on U.S. Highway 26, and they saw a long rectangular object with a triangular nose cone. She said it looked like the Washington Monument lying on its side, traveling through the air, and it had red and I think it was red and white lights on it. No, red and green lights. Sorry, I got a lot of reports here. So they had a view of it for about 5 minutes before it disappeared off into the more remote area. There's a big golf course up there called Pumpkin Ridge. They sometimes have some PGA events there, so you might have heard of it. Anyway, it went off in that direction. Well, I have a lot of these triangle cases. I was just doing a little presentation on triangle cases, so I put together a little of them. I had another case of a. Now this is interesting because this is two independent witnesses, and this occurred on August 12, 2009. The first report came from a woman who was driving north on I-5 near Woodburn, which is south of Portland. And she said she saw this object with really bright lights on it coming toward her. And at first she thought it was a plane, but when it got closer, she realized it was a strange looking triangular craft with really bright lights. And it passed over toward the rear of her car, going diagonally across the highway, and she looked around and realized that there was a lot of traffic on the freeway. Just potentially hundreds of other people that could have seen this thing. But she was so interested to find out what it was. She pulled off to the side of the road and got out of her car. But by the time she went around the back of her car, it was gone. And she never saw it again. And that was about 8:15 in the evening on that same date, August 12, 2009.
Okay.
Then
So that still would have been what a day.
later,
That would have been a daylight sighting then, 8:15 in August, right? Would it not? Would that be about right?
I would call it maybe twilight.
Twilight. Okay.
Possibly, yeah. It's probably at least a substantial amount of daylight. So then, a couple of months later, I get another report. Giving the same date of the event, 8:30 p.m. A man driving along on I-5, also driving northbound, south of Brooks, Oregon, which is about 8 miles south of Woodburn, where the first report came from. And he said he saw a triangular object with 3 really bright lights on it, moving north to south, passed over the highway. He said it was about a few hundred feet in altitude, which is very low. It would be too low for a private plane or an airliner to be flying over the freeway. And he thought it went over the edge of these scrubby trees along the freeway there and went down in a field, like landed in a field beyond there. That was his impression. Mm-hmm. And he looked around and he said, wow, there's a lot of people driving here. I wonder how many of them saw it. And he noticed people in the car next to him to his left had been looking at it and pointing, and he knew that they were reacting to it as well. So I looked at this and I realized here we have 2 reports, same date, 8 miles apart, 15 minutes apart. Most likely they were looking at the same object.
Right,
it can't be proven, but it's very likely.
Right.
The second witness estimated the speed of the object at 20 to 30 miles per hour, and that would just about be right. Yeah. If the object was going 30 miles an hour, it would have taken it about 15 minutes to go 8 miles. But anyway, I just think it's a really interesting case because of the 2 witnesses.
Right. Where you've got some corroboration there too. Now, do you get those kind of cases very often, where you've got 2 different witnesses within roughly the same approximate time frame in different locations, unconnected, seeing essentially the same thing, or is this the only instance you've come across that?
Oh no, I wouldn't say it's the only one, but they're relatively rare.
Got it. Okay.
I would like to say we get more of them because those are the really good cases when you get. I've got an even better one coming up here. I have one where I had 2 witnesses almost certainly look at the same object at the same, and they weren't driving. Well, one was driving, but he had stopped his car, and the other one wasn't driving at all. And the interesting thing is, these are the kind of cases that I really like. When you have two people together that know each other, seeing the same thing, you know that there's a chance they're collaborating on what their story is.
Right.
To some degree. And they may not be intentionally trying to make up a story and agreeing on it. It just happens because they talk about it. And they may agree on some details. But I have another case, which is from 2003. Should I talk about that one now?
Oh, absolutely.
We
yes.
would love to hear it. Yes.
Okay.
Please.
So this was one of my earlier cases. It's not in the MUFON database because it predates the current CMS system. But this was in Gresham, August 20, 2003, at about 10:30 p.m. A gentleman was driving west on Southeast Division in Gresham, which is one of the main arteries that goes east and west. And he saw a bright light hovering over the treetops on the top of a hill just to off to his left, on an angle to his left. And he was watching it as he was waiting at a red light, and he was thinking, that's a kind of a strange looking light. I wonder what it is. He thought it was, at first he thought it was a plane, but then he said, wait a minute, it's kind of hanging there. It's not moving. So he drove a few blocks after the light changed. He drove a few blocks, and he kept looking to see if he could spot it. And he would see it between the trees, and then he would not see it because it was moving. And finally he decided, oh, I'm just going to go check it out. So he makes a left turn, goes into the neighborhood, goes a couple of blocks in and makes another left turn. And there it is, right in front of him. He's looking down the street straight toward the east, and the object is about a block and a half away. It's just a big black triangle. It's just sitting there in the air. He said he couldn't understand how it could sit still in the air like that, because it wasn't like, if you know anything about helicopters, when they hover, they don't sit still.
Right.
They waver back and forth, and I don't.
And they make a lot of noise too.
Oh, they make a lot of noise, and they move around, and there's a reason for that. But I don't want to get into all the details at this point. But he looked at this for a moment. He was rather stunned, and then he realized, hey, wait a minute, I have a camera in the back seat, and he thought it was back like in the footwell of the rear seat area. So he reaches back, and he's trying to find the camera, and just then the object made a flat rotating turn and moved swiftly off to his left toward the north. And he said it was amazing because it was a very smooth. It just went from stopped to suddenly moving without any sign of acceleration, no sound, and no exhaust or any sign of engine propulsion. So he drove up to the corner, got ready to turn left, and he saw people on the street looking and pointing at this object. And he tried to decide what to do. He said he made the choice to try to follow the object, and later he regretted it. He said, I should have stopped and talked to the people.
Right.
Because when he tried to follow the object in his car, he had speed bumps on the street and everything slowed him down. He got to the corner, and it was an intersection with no light. He had to wait for traffic, and this object just zoomed off to the northwest. And pretty soon it just was so far away you couldn't really see it except for some distant red lights. Meanwhile, when I heard about this case, I talked to the guy, and it turns out he was a professional animator and illustrator, graphic artist.
Okay.
He drew me a beautiful wireframe rendition of what this object looked like. A triangular object with 3 circles at the corners, which to him represented the lights that he saw pointed downward.
Right.
And so I took that picture and I made a poster, a flyer that I put up on utility poles around the neighborhood, trying to see if I could find any other people. Because this is my neighborhood. I live in Gresham, which is a suburb of Portland. So I only live about maybe a mile from where this occurred. So I put some of these posters up around the neighborhood. And at first, I got a bunch of crank calls and such. And then finally I got one call from a woman who says, I think I saw the same thing that is on your flyer. So I went and talked to her, and her story is this. She was sitting out in her yard preparing for a yard sale, because this was August 29th that year. It was the Friday before Labor Day, and they were going to have a Labor Day weekend yard sale. So she was getting all her stuff ready, and she was sitting outside, and all of a sudden something flew over her, and she could feel it because she had a pacemaker. And she said it made her pacemaker act up as if she got too close to a magnetometer. And wow. She looked up and saw this triangular object go over with the three lights on the bottom. And it moved swiftly over to where the tall trees were about 2 blocks away from her, and it just stopped and hovered there. And she said it hovered there for several seconds. And then all of a sudden, she said she thought it just disappeared, but she wasn't sure if it moved away and was hidden by the trees or if it just disappeared. Now, I'll tell you, this neighborhood has a lot of tall Douglas fir trees, which is a very common tree in this part of the country. And they're usually run either 75 to 100 feet tall. And so this object just sort of disappeared behind these trees, in my estimation, and she couldn't see it anymore. But here I had the same time, basically, for these two witnesses' stories. And I went out and did some measurements, and I was able to figure out just about where this object was by doing triangulation calculations.
Okay.
And I came up with a size of somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 90 feet of the object, and an elevation of 500 to 700 feet above ground level.
Okay.
And that's based on the angular elevation estimates by both witnesses and the compass directions given me by both witnesses. The first gentleman, he was looking straight down a street which went straight east, so I had a real easy time with the compass direction there. The other witness, what I did was I sat with her in the yard where she had been, and I said, okay, you point to where you saw it using some trees and other objects in the local area as reference points. We were able to get an angle for where she was looking and some information in order to do the triangulation. That's kind of rare to get that good a two-witness case from separate people, but I was very fortunate to have had a case like that.
Definitely. Now, I've got some video, and you want me to go ahead and run that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it real quick. I've got to make a couple adjustments on volume because you suggested it would be best to kill the volume on this. So I'm going to run that now. And yeah, if you could tell the folks a little bit, can you do you want to do like a little bit of a lead-in in terms of what the folks are going to see and give a little bit of background on this case first, or do you think it's better that I run it? All right, yeah, go ahead. Give some background then first.
This is fairly new. This is from January 12, 2019 at about 11 p.m. The event started at 11 p.m., but they stated that this went on for about 5 hours. So this was in Gaston, Oregon, which is a small town, a very rural area out. I figure it's about 23 miles west-southwest of Portland. It's out beyond Hillsborough and Beaverton, which are much bigger, well-known suburbs. So what happened was the husband and wife, and I don't know who saw it first, but they were watching this strange object in the sky, and it appeared to be changing colors and pulsating, and they got a phone out and started shooting photos and videos of it, And I actually got 3 videos and a whole bunch of photos from them, but I picked one of the videos that was the clearest. Now, what you're going to see is simply an orb, a round object with lights, changing light patterns that seem to be coming from inside it. And they pulsate, they change colors. If I have tried to see if I can imagine what kind of normal, ordinary object could be responsible for this. It's certainly not any kind of astronomical object we know about. There's just nothing that we know of like that. If it's some kind of a drone or something, I have no idea who could make a drone sit up there for that long a time, considering the battery life on some of these drones, and also to have it look like that. Because, we know what most of these hobbyist drones look like. They look like little quadcopters or something. I don't know of any that would have an appearance like this object. And it was up there for a long time. It looks like, besides the changing colors, it looks like there's some sort of energy source inside. It's pulsing out little beams of like a plasma energy or something that, but they're all contained inside the outer perimeter of this circular object.
Okay, so let me run this now, and I'm going to ask you and Chan to be quiet. I'm going to be quiet here because I'm going to kill our volume. So let me run this now.
Okay.
Whoa, there it goes. Look at it. See?
Okay, and Tom, you were briefly telling us about this video compared to some others that you've seen that are kind of similar, but you really like this one in particular.
Well, this one's closer, appears to be closer. It's so much, the object looks so much bigger. And most of them, it's a very small, almost like a point source light, maybe just a little bigger, that's changing colors or flashing, strobing, and so forth. But this one is so much closer than the others. You can really see something. And what this one video nailed home for me was that, all right, I'm getting other videos like this. They're not as good as this one, but they're like this, and I cannot explain them. These little cell phones, their small aperture isn't good enough at capturing light. to really do a good job of taking photos of stars.
Right.
Even Venus isn't going to show up that well unless you set a time exposure on a cell phone camera.
Right. Exactly.
So these strange pulsating orbs changing colors, they're something else, and I don't know what they could be. I've tried reasoning that they could be drones or something, but I can't come up with a reasonable explanation that fits what we know about hobbyist drones and things like that. So that's why I say this is another kind of UFO.
Right.
I have a question. I wanted to know, Tom, have you had this forensically analyzed, this video, or any of the material?
I haven't had it forensically analyzed.
Are you looking forward to considering that, possibly?
Let's put it this way. My colleague Keith Rowell, who maintains our website, OregonMUFON.com, he's a fairly accomplished digital photographer. He and I have both spent a long time looking at these videos and trying to come up with an explanation. But one of the problems we have at MUFON is we have a few people that are the official photo analysts. They are pretty well backlogged with a huge number of requests for analysis. So that's the main reason I've never had one of them look at it. And as far as forensic analysis, I'm not sure who else to turn to. So no, I haven't.
Okay. Do you have any other cases you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I have some here. I had a gentleman who was out camping with his grandson. And this happened on August 1st, 2018. He was up in the Cascade Mountains along the Pacific Crest Trail. And the campground location was at a lake that's about 9 miles east-northeast of Brighton Bush Hot Springs. Brighton Bush Hot Springs is kind of a famous little place where people like to go. It's a small resort town. It's not an official city or anything, but it's a location that's on the map. But they weren't there for the hot springs. They were just camping, and they just happened to be in a spot that's about 9 miles over there. And so the gentleman was sitting by the campfire meditating. Then he decided to shine his LED flashlight up into the sky. Now, this was about 9 p.m. that this event started. He's shining his light back in the sky, and then after he got tired, he went back to meditating. Then he sensed the presence, and he opened his eyes and saw a huge black triangle hovering some 50 to 60 feet east of the campsite. He shined a light at the object, but the black exterior absorbed all the light. Then he walked toward the object, and as he approached it, he felt a vibration or energy that was pulsating in his body. And it was a very strong feeling, and he started to feel uncomfortable with it. And so he backed off. He just sat out there for a long time. After about 3 hours, he got tired of watching this thing because nothing was happening. It was sometimes emitting flashes of light, and then he saw what looked like pulses of electricity that lit up around the perimeter of the object. It had 3 white lights on the bottom at the corners, like a lot of the black triangles do. And it was just an amazing experience for him. It's a single witness case, but still, I met the guy. He's very credible, and I think it was quite an experience for him.
I just wanted to make a comment, and that is because I interview a lot of people, like Frank, I get input from folks from all over the world, and I have heard many folks share with me that they have felt some kind of vibration or energy from what they feel was not a UFO, but an ET-related craft. And it's just interesting how that could be considered a common denominator with some sightings. And also, I found it fascinating when you mentioned that a person that had a pacemaker felt some kind of something regarding that, and it could have been in relation to the sighting of the UFO.
Yeah, that got my attention too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was some kind of magnetic interference that would have caused that effect. Yeah, and as a UFO investigator, I am trying to be as objective as possible. So what happens is I try not to make assumptions about things. People have, people relate their experiences to us, and sometimes these experiences are fairly personal, especially when it's a case like this last one I talked about. We consider a close encounter. The object was closer than 500 feet to the person, and he experienced something that might be considered an interaction on some level with the object, just feeling the energy that he felt. He felt, and he told me that he felt like the object was aware of him, knew he was there, maybe knew what he was thinking. At one point, he got the idea that since he was carrying a handgun, that he should fire a shot at the object just to see what would happen, to see if the bullet would bounce off or whatever. But as soon as he thought of that, the idea came to him that, that would be a terrible idea. So he didn't do it. And this is the kind of thing that you run into all the time. I will tell you that my friend Keith Rowell, who runs our website, OregonMUFON.com, he has studied deeply the subject of the transpersonal world and transpersonal psychology. And this is a branch of psychology that is a modern attempt to explore the paranormal in a way that is semi-acceptable to academics. Because, the mainstream academic world does not want to deal with paranormal subjects. But he has studied this very deeply, and he believes that UFOs are part of this transpersonal world. And if you listen to him or read what he's written, you'll understand where he's coming from, because they do things that don't make sense in our objective reality. Sometimes they materialize and dematerialize. They can perform things, they make maneuvers in the air that are not reasonable for aircraft as we know them, or, physical human-built aircraft. So what exactly that means, I don't have the answers to that. All I can say is that people that have deep and personal experiences with UFOs, often these experiences entail something like telepathy or actual what we call mind control. And you've heard of abduction cases. I didn't go into any abduction cases, although I do get reports of abductions. I didn't go into them because they're sometimes very hard to talk about. The details can be kind of wild, and they might be a little difficult for people to talk about or think about. Plus, I accept people's stories for what they are. Very rarely have I had a case where I thought the person was actually being deceitful in some way. They're actually trying to pull one over on me, and I don't like to jump to conclusions that people are fabricating unless I have a really good reason to think so. So generally, I accept people's stories at face value. The only thing that I do is try to see if there's a rational explanation. Close encounter cases or experiences like abductions, usually there is no alternative explanation unless I really feel a person has a mental problem, which I run into occasionally. If the person really seems to be operating on a delusional level, I have to take that into consideration. But I actually haven't had that many cases of people that are like that. I could probably count on one hand the cases that I've had of that nature over the last 20 years.
Tom, really quick question for you about the cases that you do get identified. What is the usual explanation? Is it aircraft misidentifications, astronomical phenomenon? How do you usually solve these? Where do the solutions usually end up?
Number one, satellites. Recently, SpaceX sent up all these the Starlink satellites.
Right.
Well, people saw these, and we got a lot of reports. They said, "Oh, there's a whole bunch of UFOs all in a long line going across the sky." Well, we have resources like there's a website called Heavens Above. You can go and look up satellites, and when we have a good match for the location, the time, and direction of what the person describes, and we know pretty well that we're looking at satellites. The ISS is very bright, and when people haven't seen it before, sometimes they overreact. When they send up a supply ship to dock with the ISS, like a shuttle or something to take astronauts up and bring other astronauts back, or to supply the ship, they have there's a Russian Progress M module that is docked with the space shuttle. Docked with the space station. And when another ship comes up that has to dock, then they take the Progress M module and they park it in orbit some distance from ISS.
Right.
And so that what people see then is they see the ISS and this other object crossing the sky at the same time, and the one's right behind the other. And they say, "Oh, I just saw two UFOs, one's chasing the other."
Right.
Okay, now, number two, the planet Venus. Venus is spectacular when people see it. It looks just beautiful. And sometimes they overreact. They think it's, a UFO. When you can establish that they're seeing the same thing more than one night in a row in the same place, and you can say, okay, you're looking just in the right direction at the right angular elevation for this to be Venus. Some people don't want to accept it, but when we have a good match, we know that that's what they're seeing, especially if it's not moving around. It's just
sure, yeah.
There.
It is moving, but it's just going so slowly relative to the witness that it doesn't look like it's moving.
Right.
When you're done, Tom, I just want to make a comment about satellites, but go ahead.
All right. So another common thing is in photographs are camera artifacts. One of the things that people will do is they'll take a photo where the sun is in the frame of the photo, and most cameras, especially digital cameras and cell phone cameras, if you have the sun or the moon or another really bright light in the frame, it creates a blob of light opposite the light source, the bright light source. And people will see this because they don't notice it when they're taking the photo. Usually they're looking through their photos after the fact and they say, "Oh, look, there's a blue orb in my photo." And then we look at it, and I do my analysis on it. I look at where the object is with relationship to the light source, and then I can tell them, "Hey, this is an artifact caused in your camera by having a bright light in the frame." Those are some of the most common things that that people misidentify. I've had very few, I wouldn't say zero, but very few weather balloons. And another thing is birds that are seen at a strange angle, especially in photos, or insects. When people are shooting videos and an insect flies through the frame, they don't notice it when they're shooting the picture, but it shows up and they say, oh, it's this thing that just flew through the picture. And I slow it down and I go frame by frame, and usually I can identify it because I can see the wings moving, I can see the body and hanging down or whatever, depending on what size bug it is. That's one that has often come up. Any other questions?
Actually, I wanted to bring up a few things. One is something that I think you may have brought up, but you may have not used the word flare, but go ahead and correct me if that was not what you were alluding to when you were talking about a bright object in the lens of a picture somebody wanted to take a photo of. But flare in photography, as Tom, you already know, I just want to let our listeners know, it's caused when it's in a picture by light shining into the lens, and its light is reflected and scattered into the lens, causing a washout or a flare artifact, as you were saying, artifacts on camera. Right. So, or it can be caused by special lens coatings. Also, I wanted to mention something about satellites, because we did a 3-part special, which I think was about 6 or 8 hours of special over a period of a week regarding tools, skill sets, and applications, meaning software people can use to try to use an edge to capture UFO-related activity. And some of the applications that were brought up were, I'm not going to say some of these applications correctly, but theodolite, stellarium, GEOSAT watch, flight radar 24, and a Teslameter, which leverages iPhone magnetometers to measure background radiation. And there's many others. But the caveat, the disclaimer that everybody from the Phoenix MUFON boot camp we had when we had Jonathan Dover on, and I think it was Mark D'Antonio, the chief photo analyst for MUFON, and yourself are aware of, is no matter what satellite application you use on your tech devices, like a smartphone or your computer, just know this: it will not account for any top secret satellites out there. And so if you think you're using a satellite application and you know about every single satellite out there, you don't. It will not list all of them. So also another thing that I think Rich Hoffman pointed out, and that is, and also Mark D'Antonio, it is completely possible to see satellites in formation. You might see multiple ones all at once moving across the sky, just like you were mentioning the Starlink, for example, by Elon Musk.
Yes. Yes, I recently got I had a case where a guy saw a group of objects near the moon, and he thought they were coming from behind the moon. I looked up the time and date and direction, and I found a series of satellites called Flock. They all had a name with Flock in it and then a number or something. Turned out that was a group of satellites that were surveillance satellites for one of our government agencies, and but he misperceived that they were coming from behind the moon just because of the angle he was looking at them. He had the full moon in his view, and it made it look like they were coming from behind the moon, but they weren't actually coming from behind the moon. They were just appearing in that area, and he thought they were coming from behind the moon. I was pretty sure he was just seeing those satellites, and everything matched up.
Yeah, with that, the brightness of the moon was washing out the satellites when they were crossing across the face. Would that be about right?
That would probably be true, but I don't know that they were actually crossing across the face of the moon. They may have been going just right near it, but they just looked like they were coming from behind it to his from his angle. Because when I replayed this on one of my astronomy apps, I could see how close they were to the full moon. And it was easy to see how he could have thought they were coming from behind the moon.
Also, and I know I mentioned this a little bit, but there's ICE thermal devices, temperature and humidity devices, and radiation detector devices. And the list I just read off, I believe, was comprised by, I think it was Rich Hoffman had put all that together. But again, thank you very much for having mentioned those factors, because one thing, and I've interviewed a lot of people for MUFON, they have said a common denominator, like a common thread they all come across on a regular basis, are folks who mistake Venus for a UFO, stars in the sky for UFOs, satellites for UFOs, things that have prosaic explanations, flares. Then I wanted to maybe cover just a little bit about orbs. MUFON does investigate orbs, but we would like to know from you, how easy is it to rule out an orb that doesn't that is related to equipment or dust or bug in a picture?
It's actually not easy.
Okay.
There's a lot of physical factors that can be in play. And if you're, like, I saw a bunch of nighttime photos that were taken in a graveyard where people said that they were seeing orbs. There were spirit orbs. But my friend Keith thought that some of those could have been caused by moisture, because it was very damp. The humidity was high and the temperature was low. So there was a lot of mistiness in the area. Those can be very tricky, and it's hard to come up with a 100% conclusion. You almost always end up with less than a really strong conclusion about those kind of. So it's for one thing, a lot of times if you want to prove whether you can take a photo with the same kind of camera and the same kind of conditions and get orbs caused by those conditions, it's very difficult to duplicate that kind of thing. First of all, you got to have the exact same conditions, and it's not always easy to duplicate those. But I think some of the orbs are actually unknown objects. I don't know whether they really belong in the area of ghost hunting or whether they belong in the UFOs. To my way of thinking, it doesn't matter. If they're unknown, then they're unknown. And that would mean in MUFON terms that they're UFOs, even though they may not be, something that anyone would consider similar to an alien spacecraft. Still, they're unknown.
And so. Thank you for talking about that. I wanted to mention something Frank and I talk about all the time on our podcast, and it's important to note EG data, and that is, I'll just let our listeners know, EXIF data, and that contains a lot of information about the camera, potentially where the picture was taken, the GPS coordinates, the date, the time, the camera settings, possibly include copyright information. There could be metadata, anything related to just really a ton of information. And also, Frank and I will talk about whether EXIF data can be manipulated. And it's just interesting how the various ways folks can actually mess with a picture so that a picture can look like the EXIF data was never manipulated. But then if there's a picture of a manipulated picture, you'll never know. There's a lot of different tricks people can do in order to make it look like there is a UFO that somebody's looking at, or a fleet of UFOs.
Yes. EXIF is the metadata, to be clear. Okay. And we use that whenever we can, if it's available. If it's not available, then the question is, can we get the original photo from the witness? Some people have trouble with it. I don't know if it's because of the software in their phone or what, that once they've sent it as a copy to someone else, it gets changed, and it's really difficult to get the original. It may have to do with the particular types of phones, what kind of software they have, and so forth. But I have found that to me, I have a very strong principle that I go with. The photo by itself isn't nearly as important unless you have the witness that you can talk to and know exactly what their level of expertise is, what motives do they have. Do they have any motive to make up a fake photo? If not, then probably there's no reason why they would have faked anything. To go to the trouble of manipulating EXIF to make it look like an original photo, that implies someone really trying to pull off a hoax. I have run into very few people that are that interested in coming up with a UFO hoax, and most of them are teenage boys that are just messing around, making up stories and submitting them to MUFON as UFO reports. They're not trying to make up fake photos and all that kind of stuff. So I run into very little of that kind of stuff in all the years I've been doing this. So my number one thing about the photos is if someone shows me a photo or a video they got off the internet, the first thing I ask them is, what's the source? Where did it come from? Do we have any way of contacting the original photographer? If not, then I say, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. It means nothing. I know nothing about what it's been through, who could have manipulated it. If I don't even have the date, time, and place where the photo was taken, I have very little data. It's not important to me. Some people put a lot of stock in these things they find on the internet. And I just try to tell them, look, whatever you believe about UFOs and all that, I respect that. But don't believe some kind of photo or video you find on the internet unless you can actually track down the original source and the provenance of that material. Because if you can't, it's not really worth spending any time at all on.
I agree. Do you have any other cases you would like to share with us?
Well, I went through my whole list of cases.
Okay.
You have a lot of questions you wanted to ask me. You want to get into any of those?
I sure do. Yes. Thank you very much for, let's go ahead and move on to that other part. And that is, wanted to ask you, what is the last UFO or MUFON related conference you attended, and how did that go for you?
Well, that was the last MUFON symposium down in Southern California. Where is it?
I think that might be Irvine, California. Or was it right, Irvine?
Right.
Yeah.
Irvine. Yes. That's a lot. Oh, it was great. We had a lot of good sessions, especially the state director meeting with Doug. What is Doug's name? Darn. You know Doug, don't you?
Yeah, right. He's the. So we have Steve Hudgens, who is the International Director of Investigations, and then we have Doug, who is the Director of the U.S. Investigations, right?
MUFON Chief Investigator, yeah.
Right.
And we had a really good session on questions of deciding what's an unknown and what's an identified, and why recently the statistics have gotten skewed. And it had a lot to do with some information that went out as to what the standards were for deciding whether something's an unidentified or it's identified. And Doug Wilson, sorry, that's the name. I just went blank for a moment. But anyway, that was a really good session. It was very important to go through that. And of course, the guest speakers. Generally speaking, we have some really good guest speakers at MUFON symposiums, and the last time was very good.
Would also like to mention, I would also like to mention that, sorry, I thought I was on mute, that there's the McMinnville's UFO Festival annually, which you have gone every year, I believe faithfully, and a few speakers that I believe you may have seen talk there were Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Martin. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so you went this last year. I know that there are quite a few interesting guests there. Do you recall maybe one that you just want to mention that you saw that that was something really nice to see or listen to?
Well, Commander David Fravor, he's one of the pilots that chased UFOs in an FA-18 based on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, and so it was really good to hear him firsthand. Well, I'm not 100% sold on Bob Lazar, but it was interesting hearing him firsthand. And so,
yeah, I just wanted to mention the person that you just mentioned. He was actually introduced on stage by George Knapp, and we also, Frank, do you recall we actually interviewed Paco? Is it Chiriqui? Is that how I say his name?
Right. Yeah.
Commander
That was
Fravor's
a couple
good
months
friend.
ago, right before Christmas.
Yeah. And he's a good friend of Fravor, and it was just fascinating talking to one of his close friends to talk more about the Tic Tac, and also we have interviewed folks who were on the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton, 4 people regarding that Tic Tac incident. So it's neat to be able to hear more about that topic. And then I wanted to ask you about a little bit about MUFON. I just want to know, why do you feel that? Why is MUFON relevant to the realm of ufology?
There's no one else in the entire world doing what MUFON is doing today that we know of, and that is attempting to follow up and document as much as possible all the information on all the UFO reports we receive. And it's a huge effort, and it's all volunteers. I've heard rumors that China has a UFO study group, but of course they don't tell anyone else about it. So all I have is rumors. There may be people in the Soviet Union studying UFOs, but I have no idea what that program looks like or what they're doing with their data, because once again, they're not sharing the rest of the world. But MUFON is a public organization. We share the data. Now, we used to let people look at all the reports for free, but the problem is MUFON needs money. We need some way to encourage people to join MUFON. So now, if you want to go out and search the sighting database and see what we've got, you need to be a member. But it's a organization that has I think it's growing, and it's really I just think it's a Big Tent organization. Some people think that MUFON has restrictive ideas about things. There were times when they were a little narrower in their view, but I don't think that's true today. I tell people that MUFON's a Big Tent organization. There are people with all sorts of beliefs about UFOs. But to me, the important thing is we have a basic core value in MUFON, and that is, let's gather the facts. And then let's get the facts down first. Then we can talk about what we think about them. And that's my attitude, too. When I investigate UFO reports, it's not about what I believe. It's about the facts that I can gather. And as soon as I get a report, I start with looking for all the facts I can get. I find the date and time and the place, and I look up the weather report. I get that information down. Then I check if the star positions are relevant and satellites. Then I look up astronomical data. I get the latitude and longitude of the location of the sighting. I get all this stuff down into the report first. Then I start working on the rest of the stuff. And a lot of people think that those facts don't matter, but they do matter. And in the final analysis, if you end up with 2 reports that are close enough together in time and in space, you may have a 2-witness case. Now, it's happened to me a couple of times. And when I had all the relevant information gathered, I knew that I had possibly 2 witnesses to the same event. It's really great when you can do that. But if you don't know all the facts, it's sort of hard to establish that. And if you don't know what the weather report is, you may not know what the visibility was like. And if someone sees an object in the sky, you want to know whether there were clouds in the sky. Was this object above the clouds or below the clouds? Or were there no clouds? That all those things matter. And MUFON trains investigators so that they have the knowledge to gather those facts and understand that they're relevant. And then all the rest of the stuff is fun to talk about. But if you don't have the basic facts, you're not working from a good, solid base when you go into discussions about UFOs.
So MUFON uses a scientific model in order to investigate, and of course that's of paramount importance and the core of being able to actually assess any kind of cases that come forward to MUFON. Steve Hudgens was also saying that he is the international director of 150 different countries. So MUFON covers quite a large area of the planet, especially since there's like 193 countries in the world. So MUFON, I'm very glad to say, is there for anyone to join. And if you want to join MUFON, just go to MUFON.com, and it's a very user-friendly menu, and I would highly recommend folks join this organization that's been around for half a century. Wanted to ask you, as a member of MUFON, what is your role, and what do you feel your role is and does for MUFON?
Okay, I'm the state director for Oregon, and to me, there's 2 very important roles as state director. One of them is to be in charge of investigating UFO reports that for events that occur in Oregon, and it's really important for me to have other people that are willing to do the investigations. When someone becomes a new MUFON investigator in Oregon, I'm responsible ultimately for training that person, finishing the training for that person, and getting them involved in their cases, working with them to get them up to speed for their first few cases. Because it's not easy. I'm going to tell you right now, it is very challenging. So if anyone wants to become a UFO investigator and they're not afraid of a really good challenge, by all means, please sign up with MUFON and take the training, become an investigator. It's really interesting. The other thing that's really important to me is public outreach and public education. I want to make sure that we have meetings that people can come to and try to reach out and let the public know more about UFOs, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. People have been taught over many decades to make fun of UFOs. And not everyone does it, but some people still do. They think it's a subject of ridicule. We want to change that attitude among people in the public. Part of it is this. When people are dealing with things they don't understand or are unknown to them, one of the ways they deal with that is by humor. And there's 2 different kinds of humor, but sometimes humor can get a little bit negative, especially when it's directed towards someone who's talking about an experience they had that you don't understand. We like to try to counteract that by educating people and getting them to understand that, yeah, there are strange things in this world that you may not understand, but there's no reason why that should be turned as ridicule against someone else who's experienced something that you don't understand. So that's the most important parts. There's a lot of other little details. I'm responsible for dealing with the money because we collect donations, and then I have to spend that money on different things like renting rooms for meetings, and et cetera, et cetera. But the main 2 things are, like I say, being in charge of the investigations, making sure those get done, and public education.
I wanted to mention something that we talked about before we went on to this interview, and that was a case you felt would be of interest, possibly, and that is the RB-47 case radar bomber case. Sorry. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about that case?
Oh, I should have. I'm sorry, I didn't brush up on it. I'm going to give you a real a summary of it. This occurred in Texas. I don't remember the year now, but it was a few decades ago, actually.
I think it was late 50s, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I took a look at it.
That sounds about right. So this plane, the RB-47, was basically a B-47 bomber that was outfitted for electronic surveillance. It had radar equipment and other radio listening devices in it. It was basically an electronic spy plane. It was flying across Texas and encountered an object that at first they thought it was an aircraft, because by this time aircraft were equipped with transponders, and so they were looking at the radar signature of this craft and looking for the transponder information, and they realized that it was echoing back their own transponder, which is very strange, because that's not normal. And a gentleman named Brad Sparks, who I met back in my Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area days, I got to know him. I think this is a really interesting case, and if I messed up some of the details, I apologize, because I didn't do my homework on that one before our session here today. But if anyone's interested, they should just look that up. The RB-47 case. It's the details are fascinating. I wouldn't say it's a quick read. It's probably a fairly long article. There's a lot of technical details in there, but I think it's worthwhile, because it's a really important case, because of what it told the people involved, the military people involved, that these UFOs are definitely, there's some kind of intelligence behind them, because only something with an intelligent control system could have done what this object did.
Yeah, I actually typed in exactly what you said, and I added the acronym UFO. And you're right, the data is there to read. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I'm glad we were able to actually mention the case so that folks can find out more about it. And then I wanted to ask you, go into a few questions that are a little bit deeper than what we've covered. And one of those questions is, has society evolved to the point where it feels there's extraterrestrial activity and they're more willing to acknowledge the possibility of it? Has society evolved to the point where it feels there could be, let me say that, there could be extraterrestrial activity, and they are more willing to acknowledge the possibility of that idea?
Well, when you talk about these kind of issues and you try to paint things with a broad brush, society involves a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. They have different religious beliefs. They have different backgrounds. And I would say there's probably a lot of people today that are willing to accept the idea of, intelligent life somewhere else in our universe. As for society, society is constructed with a lot of layers. And we have the elites, the people that run things, such as the corporate executives, the top level academics, government officials. Many of them are not ready to deal with an issue like that publicly, mainly because they don't want to upset the current paradigm. People in power don't like to roll the dice with something that could represent a change in the paradigm that might diminish their power. So, but when it comes to the grassroots people, and especially younger people, I would say, yeah, most of those people are quite willing to entertain the notion of some other sort of intelligence somewhere else. If you look at the way we've behaved here, amongst ourselves, warring all the time, plundering our planet and polluting it, you can't say that we represent the highest form of intelligent life. So I would like to think that there's someone somewhere that's more intelligent than us, maybe could handle things differently than the way we've done it. But I want to point out something else. There's often an assumption that what UFOs represent are visitors from another planet, just like flesh and blood beings of some sort, riding a spacecraft and coming here. But my feeling is that if we could find out what's really going on and really understand it, it would be a lot more complicated than that. These beings might not just be traveling through space to get here. They might be traveling through time. And we don't understand that yet. But if you look at what Einstein wrote, he came to the conclusion that space and time were part of the same thing, to the point where he referred to it as space-time. And much of his theoretical work was based on this idea that space and time were part of the same thing, and relativity and all that stuff. So the other thing that we don't really understand is whatever these beings are, what the nature of them could be. Their consciousness could be evolved at a totally different level than us. They could represent beings from a parallel universe of some sort that intersects with ours. So that the basic idea of just someone traveling in a spacecraft from another star, a system, that may be too simplistic an idea. It could be much more complicated than that. That's why when we talked before, I mentioned Jacques Vallée, because Jacques Vallée throws out ideas like that. Another thing I will say, that any of our listeners who most of their information they get from either listening to podcasts on the internet, or they get it from watching television shows like Ancient Aliens, things like that, I would encourage them to try to find some good books on the subject of UFOs. The reason I say that is because many of the books go into much greater detail than what you can get on the media presentations that you might hear either on the internet or on television. And the other important part about books is you can reread a page over and over if you don't understand it and try to get the gist of it, or you can go to the references, the footnotes, bibliography, endnotes, look up other materials to find out, okay, what's the basis for this idea that's being discussed? You get your other references. You can get a lot more information that way. My friend Keith has a background as a librarian, and on our website, OregonMUFON.com, there is a section there that refers to books, and you go in there and he put together a really great annotated bibliography of the UFO subject. People who have found this bibliography have said, oh, this is the greatest thing. I wish I'd known about this before, because they find that here they have a great list of some of the best books on the UFO subject that you can find anywhere. And it's annotated, gives a brief description of many of these titles and what they're really about. And I would highly recommend that anyone who really wants to do some serious study on the UFO subject should read some of these books.
On December 16, 2017, there was an article in the New York Times by Helen Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Keene regarding glowing R's and black money in the AATIP program, and how there had been a UFO program with a budget by the Pentagon for about 5 years. And some people considered that article a form of disclosure by the U.S. government regarding the UFO topic. Do you believe that's the case? And if that's not the case, do you believe disclosure has already happened regarding that topic, or will?
Okay. I'm gonna take you to a point where I have to explain something about the word believe and my thought processes. For me, I only like to use believe when I'm talking about something like an article of faith, like religious matters. To me, I like to deal more in facts.
Yeah,
certainly
I'm
there's
sorry.
different interpretations.
We had this conversation. Go ahead and insert the word think and just trade it out regarding believe. Do
Right.
you believe that disclosure, or do you think the gist of it is, has disclosure happened? If it has not, when will it? I just don't want to get into the semantics of it. I thoroughly understand your perspective. We've had this conversation, but the gist of the question is, do you think disclosure has happened? If not, when will it? If not, if it will not happen, why not?
Well, here's the thing. Disclosure is not a single event. It's a process. And there's that point where that article was published is absolutely a very important moment. And it was a seminal in the disclosure process. What happened over the subsequent months was that much of the material that came out at that time was explored by other people. Questions were asked of the Pentagon and the Navy in particular to find out what they were doing, if in fact they were exploring the questions of what are these objects. Now, the Navy and the military in general no longer likes to use the term UFO. But the fact that you can ask them about UFOs and you get a negative response doesn't really mean they're not interested in the subject. It means they don't like to use that term because the term has acquired too much cultural baggage. Even though the Army investigated or invented the term UFO, they like to call them unidentified aerial phenomena. But yes, they did agree that they are interested in studying these things, and they have been studying them. They really can't not study them, because you have to realize with all the electronic equipment that they're using, radar, satellites, everything, they know pretty much everything that's going on in our skies. And if any of this stuff presents any kind of a risk or threat to aviation or military operations, they're concerned about it, and they should be concerned about it. If you put your Air Force general hat on for a moment, you have to realize if there's some kind of what looks like spacecraft flying around in our atmosphere and they're not ours, then someone like that would be concerned, because it's a matter of national defense, national security to them. Even though there may not be any overt hostile acts going on, because they don't know exactly what they're up to, they are concerned. Now, over the years, there have been incidents at nuclear bases that have occurred, and this has been going on for decades. And so that right there is enough of reason for them to be concerned, for the military people to be concerned. Now, remember, these Tic Tac incidents, Tic Tac and the other videos like that, those occurred on during exercises by military. And here we have all kinds of, highly weaponized, planes carrying all kinds of weapons. Now, maybe during exercises, they weren't carrying live weapons, but still, they are weapons of war. The aircraft carrier itself is a weapon of war. The aircraft carrier is powered by nuclear power. All this stuff all points to concerns about not just weapons, period, but nuclear weapons and any use of nuclear power as part of our defense arsenal. So you will find that if you study the literature, you will find a number of incidents that have to do with things that happen around nuclear bases. Roswell Army Airfield was the home of the 509th Bomber Group. That is the group that sent the plane over to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the atomic bombs. That's where they came from. They were our first base with atomic bombs, and for many years they were our only base with atomic bombs. So the Roswell incident didn't just happen out of the blue. There's some other factor involved there, and it has to do with nuclear weapons. Actually, I sort of got off on a tangent there. But okay. You see all that stuff, but still, when it goes back to disclosure, the confirmation that came up in the year and a half or so after that disclosure in 2017, all the way through 2019, there were further disclosures that came out that showed that, yes, in fact, our military has been studying this for a long time. Now, full disclosure, that's more difficult. For one thing, there's a lot of detailed stuff that we may never get them to release. Let us say, and this may or may not be true, but let's assume that they have wreckage from the Roswell crash and dead bodies of aliens stored somewhere. Are they ever going to give those things up? That would be pretty difficult, because then someone has to admit, oh yeah, we've been lying to everyone for decades and saying, oh no, there's no such thing. And the same thing with many of the other, possible pieces of wreckage or other artifacts or debris that have been collected over the decades. It's much more difficult to get someone to disclose things to that level. But the disclosure has begun. It's not, and you can't really turn back the clock on that sort of thing. You can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. It's just going to progress at a slower pace than maybe we'd like, but it's happening.
Yeah, you actually answered just about every question I had thereafter. You're very comprehensive in your answers, so that was fantastic. I'll want to ask you one last question, and that is, if you had one or a few things to say that represent how you feel, think, or fill in the blank about the topic of ufology, what would it or they be?
Oh boy. All right. UFOs are stranger than we think. That's that's my lead topic sentence. And the reason I'll say that is because a lot of people think more on the level, as I was saying before, of spacecraft from another planet carrying alien beings, piloted by alien beings that are visiting here. But they are almost certainly stranger than that. There are too many strange phenomena that go along with ufology that we can't escape from. people who are having abduction experiences, they often experience very strange things, such as telepathy, teleportation, levitation, seeing craft materialize and dematerialize, having conversations with these beings, which appear to be telepathic because they say they can hear the thoughts in their head, but they can't see the mouth moving, that kind of thing. Now, beyond that, anyone who's really interested in the abduction topic, I would suggest that they read some of the really good books on the subject to really explore what people have thought about this over the past 20 years or more, because there's a lot of speculation, some of it based on some pretty good data, but I don't want to get too deep into it right now. But it all goes back to what I originally said. This whole thing, if you're not deep into it, as I've been for many years and haven't read so many books on it, you're in for a real surprise if you decide you want to dig in and really study the subject, because, as I said, it is much stranger than you think.
I wanted to mention the URL to your website, which I believe is MUFONOregon.com.
Yeah, I've got the link. I'm going to put it in the description section, so they'll be able to find that. And look in the right sidebar for that collection of suggested reading for books and all that.
Great. And then if Tom could just verbally say the address of the website, that would be great.
Yeah, it's OregonMUFON.com.
Great. OregonMUFON.com. Wanted to mention that 50 years ago, MUFON was created in 1969. It's a nonprofit organization. It has thousands of members all over the world in many countries, all 50 states. And the international director is Jan Harzen. The international director of investigations is Steve Hudgens. We talked about Doug tonight. And then also wanted to thank Tom Bowden, who is the director of Oregon MUFON, for having been on with us tonight and spent so much time talking to us about such fascinating cases and prepared such a wonderful talk for us. It's been such a pleasure and an honor having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking to you tonight.
Thank you for giving me the chance to be on your show.
We're very grateful to have had you on. I learned a lot, and I'm also glad that you went over so very carefully how important it is for folks that if they're going to study the topic of UFOs, which, and to remind our audience, that is unidentified flying objects. I know you know that, but we really need to understand that is exactly what it is. They're unidentified. If you want to really get into that, it's important that you remain circumspect. You have a healthy skepticism, and part of that healthy skepticism is using equipment to try and capture UFO activity, but also make sure that you try and get it forensically investigated if you're in a position to do so. There's one website I do use to look over photos I wanted to mention, and that is photoforensics.com. And it's FOTO forensics.com. What you can do is you can upload a photo there, and that reveals every aspect of the photo regarding the EXIF data and more to see if the photo has been manipulated in any way, shape, or form. That's not the last word on whether it has been, but it's an interesting website, one of hundreds on the net, and many other different kinds of software to use to try and determine what exactly you're looking at in the sky or coming out of the ocean.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Let me get the last word in here. Thanks again to Tom Bowden, and we are going to be back Sunday with Buddy from Alien Protocols. That should be a lot of fun. So
Yes,
looking forward to that.
Thank you very much for mentioning that. We've had Buddy on before, and I wanted to see if Tom had any last words before we go.
No, I think probably the best piece of equipment for investigating UFOs is a good, strong mind.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks, Chant, and we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks for everything. Bye-bye now.